Okay, good morning. So this morning we are going to, Miss Hashem, discuss lots of interesting things. We're going to discuss rice, we're going to discuss popcorn, and we're going to discuss soya. So lots of interesting and relevant halachas. Says we're up to Sif Zayin, Reish Ches, Simon Reish Ches, Sif Zayin. Says the Mechaber, Hakoises, Pirush Ha'eichel, that means someone eats es ha'eres. He eats rice, but he eats it raw, he eats it straight. Mevarech alav beri pri ha'adoma. He makes a beri pri ha'adoma, fa'achrav beri nefashos. In bishla, but if he cooks it, says the Ramah, actually nismayach, that it becomes softer. Oishesh tachno, he grinds it, v'asim in a pas, and he makes some sort of rice bread. Then mevarech alav beri mine mezainos, fa'achrav beri nefashos. You make a mezainos and a beri nefashos afterwards. So that is generally the halacha of rice. That's what we're familiar with. Let's finish Mechaber. That is if you're eating the rice straight. But if you put the rice into another dish, for example, you put it into some meat, and the meat is the rove, then whatever the rove is, you make the bracha of that tavshil. Okay, let's go. So let's see the Mishnah Berurah. So if a person eats rice, pirush she'achlu kshehu chai, but you eat the rice when it's in a raw state. So then we said that you make the Mechaber says then you make a beri pri ha'adoma. Now says the Mishnah Berurah Sif Katan Hey ha'eres rice. Doichan is hirs. Doichan is millet, a different type of grain. Belashon Ashkenaz. V'yesh mefarshin ibchen. Others say it's the other way around. Since there is a bit of confusion, says the Mishnah Berurah, what bracha is eirez and what bracha is doichan, then better to eat it as part of a meal. We'll see in a second. However, v'lechem chamud is kosov d'sugim d'alma, eirez riza, and doichan is his. Generally, we know that eirez is rice, and therefore it's a beri pri ha'adoma raw and a beri mezainos when it's cooked, and that's how we know heg. V'chein muchach b'Reb Yosef of Mat Yehuda, v'chein malsosim ma'aserav me'anhagos ha'gra to eirez who rise. Mavarech aleim beri mezainos, and that is our practice, and we of course make a beri mezainos on rice. But if it's eaten raw, you make a beri pri ha'adoma. Once it's cooked, however, you make a beri mezainos. Ad shenismaich, says the Ramah. What does that mean? Says Mishnah Berurah Chavov, Hainu afilu nismaich ktsas al yedei bishul, even though it becomes somewhat softened through cooking. Avol kashem adayin shleimin, but when it's still in a very raw state, mevarich beri pri ha'adoma. Ve'efsha, ta'afilu imrak husa klipas ha'eretz kamei b'kishelanu, when the outer husk has been taken off, gam kein lo mikri shleimim, u'mevarich aleihem beri mezainos. Already maybe at that stage, when it's partly processed, does it become a mezainos? We call makom beri pri ha'adoma mashma de yotze b'zeh. It's mashma there that you are yotze. Ayin sham. Okay. Now, then, moreover, if you take the rice and you make it into some sort of, either you cook it, you make a mezainos, or if you make it into a bread. I've never had it. You ever had it? Rice bread? I don't know. You have rice cakes and things like that, but not rice bread. I don't know. But there is such a thing. But if you were to have this rice bread, it hasn't got the status of proper bread, and vuadim b'tavshil, and you make a mezainos. Mavarech alav beri mezainos, says the Mishnah Berurah Chav Ches, it's a pas sheloi, a tavshiloi maspia v'soyed halev. You make a mezainos, and therefore mine mezainos. Mezainos is a relation of mezayin. It's maspia. It satiates. Kamei chamesh mini dagon. Va'odif misham mine kinyas, and it's considered superior to other types of beans. Or mikol makom lo choshev pas sheloi kelechem gomor, but it's not considered proper bread. Shel chamesh mini dagon levarech hamoitzi. So it's like a halfway house. You make a beri mezainos on it, but yet you make a beri nefashos. You don't make an alamichyo, and if you make a bread out of it, the same thing. It doesn't get the status of proper bread. Now, if you look at 26, which is at the back of the...
At least make a lamichya.
No, on rice you make a beri nefashos.
I know, but if you say this rice,
no,
rice bread business.
No,
you got.
Yeah, no, but you make a beri nefashos. I think that's a... Take a look at 26. Now, where is 26?
Page 46.
46.
Page 46. 26. Yeah, v'chein, and also in Netilas Yadayim. so you don't have to wash for either. Kosav le'el, mishar minim einat tzrichin atilas la'ilam, afim kovalem suda, or mishum she'ena bichlal pas klal. So it's not considered pas bichlal, and therefore you don't need to wash for it. Imagine like a rice cake, that sort of thing, just treat it like that, and therefore it make mazonis in the brain of fashas. Now, okay, we'll see in a second. Brain of fashas rabbis, the Brachos Hamazon, Brachos Mein Shalish, Einom El Bechamisha Minim, in Pnei Chashivusim, they say Mefurish. Yeah? So you see, Brachos Hamazon and Alamichya is only for the 5 grains because of their chashivas. But rice and things like that, which is not one of the 5 grains, even if you make a rice bread, you would not make Brachos Hamazon, nor Alamichya, you would make a brain of fashas. For who shelo Yehei v'hainu da'af b'chamishim nidogon kaimelon da'el b'sif base tim irvan b'sham minim afilu hem hamut alzina basraihu. You go after them. Oirez ein choshev kol kach v'al kein im osa tavshelei pas v'kemach d'sham minim hem haroiv mevorchelov kebirchas eisa minim. So just to explain. So what have we said? If you eat rice raw, you make a ber pradoma. If you eat it when it's processed and cooked, you make a ber in mazonas, and you always make a ber in fashas on it. If the rice is mixed with other things, then if the other thing is the majority, you make the bracha what the other thing is. So for example, you've got some rice mixed, let's say, with with mincemeat and with stuffed peppers, holishkas, something like that. Then it's you make on whatever the rove is. Let's say shahakal or whatever the rove is. It's in contrast to the chamishim minidogon, because if you have, for example, lasagna, and the lasagna may not necessarily be the mazonis, may not necessarily be the rove, because you've got lots of vegetables and other things, but because of the chashivas of the status of mazonis, then you make a mazonis on it. Masha'en kein this mazonis. Rice is not considered as choshev as the other things.
Lasagna is because of the pasta, you say?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Okay, levadoi. Let's just finish the Mishnah on this one. Sheloi he'ma'erv dova acher ela oirez levadoi. Hu adin im hu arov. V'nokal levadoi lashmin and revusa. To teach me the chiddush. Ta'afilu hachi in mevorachim brocha achrena ki im ber nefashos rabbis. Right? So very clear. You only make a ber nefashos. Hu arov v'chein pasku harba achrenim. Did someone want to say something? You want to say something? No. Okay. Also, by the way, even if you have a lot of the rice cakes, as opposed to the 5-minute dogon, you never kover sud on it. So, for example, if you have 2 slices of pizza we've spoken about, you can wash and bench. If you have a lot of mazonas, 5 pieces of chocolate cake, big pieces of chocolate cake, you wash and bench. But you can have 3 packets of rice cakes or a lot of rice bread. That will never make it washing and bench. And the same, by the way, with pasta. If you have a lot, 2-3 bowls of pasta, which is kover suda. That doesn't make you never wash and bench on that, because it never has that status. You've cooked it. It's not the same as the 5-minute dogon, which is baked. Okay, have a look at 28. This is also interesting. What about if you have soup with rice in it? Right, now that's it's quite common. You have a tomato soup or whatever it may be with rice in it. So look at 28. You have soup which is cooked with some rice in it. It's treated as one entity, and therefore, you make one bracha. What bracha is that? What is your thought process? Is it that you're having soup, and is it really the ikar is the rice, and you're just having the soup to sort of supplement the rice? Then because that's the ikar, that's the most choshev thing, and therefore you make a bermin mizonos on that soup, and that would exempt the bracha on the soup. Which I think is the most common way of doing it. That you're having soup, but you just add a bit of rice into it to make it nice, or add flavor or taste, whatever. Then mevarich shahakol. Let's say you're having a pure soup, then you make a shahakol. If you like both, I like the combination. Then mevarich kebirchas hamin sharev menu. Then you go after the rove. So if it's rove rice, then
Honestly, it's not shahakol though, right?
So again, if you've got the bits of tomato, then you make a berber adoma. And if it's pure, then it's. I know we've joked. One of my kids at home is they like knedlich. So I say he's the only kid I know who has his chicken soup with a knife and fork. Yeah. All right. That is Zayin. Okay, so just to summarize Zayin, you have rice in any raw state, you make a berper adoma, but ordinarily in the cooked or processed way, you make a berm named Zonis, and you always make a berm nefashis afterwards. And therefore, by the way, Rice Krispies and Cocoa Pops and things like that, you make a berm named Zonis and a berm nefashis at the end.
Can I just ask you, Yossi, you were saying about tomato soup?
Yeah.
The little bits of tomato aren't enough to make.
It's not the so long as it's nika, it's not some question of rove in that situation. It's a question of what's the identification of it. What does it look like?
If you can nick a piece of tomato, that's sufficient.
But we've got to balance it. It's a bit tricky. So long as you've got the bits of it and you can see that it's a vegetable, so it's not sort of liquidized, and you've got the bits of vegetables, then it's a berper adoma. It's like what? Chulin soup. Yeah. Okay, let's do ches. Al pas doichan. So this is on pas doichan or plush shamini kidneys, which is like it's millet, another type of grain. Mavarich shahakol va'achrov bein nefashos. That is a shahakol, and the after brach is bein nefashos. Ha'isa tavshil mishamini kidneys. If you make a dish with other types of grains, not the ones we've mentioned so far, im nishar shleim, if they remain whole, the tovim, mevushalim kamechain, and they're eaten, cooked and raw, they're as good. Mavarich bein pri adoma. But if it's sort of mushed, as it were, they sort of crushed, they change their form, then if they're not as good, if they're cooked raw, then once you cook them and process them, you make a shahakol. That's on this millet type or other types of grains. Okay, al pas doichen. Says the Mishnah Lamed Gimel. Even though they are from the ground, so now that you've made bread out of this millet grain, then it's changed for the better. It's no longer the original format. You can no longer make a berper adoma. And you only make hamoitzi on the 5 grains, and therefore, when you've baked this millet or cooked it, whatever you do to it, mevarchin shahakol. Another reason, that's not the normal way of eating. Because you don't make pas like this. Whatever, Turkish rice. You familiar with that? Yeah, no, Turkish rice. Cool. So he says tiras at the bottom. It's corn. Lechera birchos and berper adoma. If that's how people generally eat it, then you make a berper adoma. Given to shedarken bekach. Avol b'tshuvas chas m'soifa siman nun masik the bechol mikol makom ein mevarchim berper adoma mitam deloi noti adaiti tochi. It wasn't planted for this. It's chicken food, right? You don't eat it. And out of necessity, people make bread out of it. And that's not the real function of this type of fruit, of this product. And therefore you do not make a berper adoma, you make a shahakal. Maybe you could treat it like rice. So if you have this millet or other grain type of bread, have it in part of a meal because it's a bit unclear what the bracha should be. Okay, uplizui, but tamid Rabbi Yonah Kosov pinitzu. It's all the same thing. It's something which satiates more than other types of grains. For Kamash Milan, you still make a shahakol if you make a bread out of it. And this is true also if you make products out of the powder, the flour of them, you would also make a shahakol. If you look at 32, with regard to a naknik is a sausage, hasuyim misoya. Now, what bracha do you make on soya? It's the same thing, really, because soya is a bean, and really, if you think about it, it should be berper adoma. So, but we don't. We make shahakal on our soyas. So he says in 32, which is I'll just read it for you. It's 32, which is at the back. It's on. But he refers you. It's a bit confusing. This. I know that's on popcorn. Okay, but kids, the soya, he says you make a shahakal on it because it's so deviated from its original form. It's crushed and processed and whatever. You make a shahakal on it, even though technically it's a bean, a soya bean. So that's the minhag olam on all types of soya, foods. You make a shahakal. Now, interestingly, what about popcorn? Because popcorn, it's tiras, it's corn, and which is a berper adoma. what has it changed sufficiently to make a shahakal or not? So I'll just read to you. He refers back to another footnote. He says, "V'legabe popcorn, hayra gon Moshe Feinstein shebirchosa ber priadoma." That's what we do. We make a ber priadoma on popcorn because it's not so distinct from the original corn, and that is what we do. The other poskim as well all say that you make a ber priadoma on popcorn. Okay, let's carry on the Mishnah Berurah. Lamed Vov. Misham and Akinya. So if you make a bread out of other types of grains, not the 5 grains, you make a shahakol. Vuadin midoichan, and so too with spelt. If you mash a posak amachav mikodim midoichan shovel akinyas. Nishar shleimim lav dafka shleimim ele kol shleim nismachu legamri. Anything which is not so totally crushed. Shadayin nika ktsas ta'aron v'tzrosin, where some of the appearance is already still there. Berchos and berpradom. But if so if you can still see a grain-like material, then you make a berpradoma. Valkein masha onu korin retzin kasha, which he says at the bottom is daisis kusemes, which is like a spelt porridge. I wonder if it's the same as kasha, that it's some type of grain, made a dish out of that. Mevarchim berpradoma, that you would make a berpradoma. Nismachu legamri. But if it's totally liquid, sort of solidified. Hainu davka she'isa tavshel mikemach shel kitnias she'in derech achilosem mekach or shemiech oisem derech kli menukov she'in dakin moed. You sort of sieve it and you make it like a fine flour kemach imashenase min retzka shanu korin melach groifen. It's hard to know exactly what all these things are. Avukashebishla kitnias shleimin u'miechsem mekach. When you cook whole grains and then you mash them, ikka derech achilosem mekach. And then that's just the way of eating it. Like on potatoes mashed, you make a ber priadoma, etc. And on that, the Ramah says you make a brach when you cook these types of other grains. You make a shahakol. Interestingly, but the eved ber priadoma. You make a ber priadoma. The yotza. The Chai Adam says the yotza. Now that, just quickly looking at 34, very interesting thing. For those who don't brach don't have brachs on Pesach, it ends up, I don't know if you thought about it, but you never make a ber mitzvah on Pesach, right? That's just the reality.
That's the problem with Kiddush.
That's the problem with Kiddush, etc., etc. But so what? When you have cake on Pesach, what cake is it? It's potato flour. Now, what is potato flour? Potato flour is crushed potatoes, very very fine. That it's changed its status so much that it's got a din of shahakol. And therefore, we would all make shahakol on potato flour cakes on Pesach or throughout the year. Now, what if you made a beri priadoma by mistake on that cake? You should have made a shahakol. So in 34 he says, V'chein, just like the Chai Adam says over here, he says, V'chein le'inyan ugiyos sha'osim mekemach tapukei adama. If you make a beri priadoma by mistake on cakes made out of potato flour, hayra gon Rosh Hashanah arbach, that she'im birich aleim beri priadoma yotza b'diavad. So for some reason you think potato flour and you get confused and you make a ber priadoma on that cake, then you're b'diavad yoyse, you should make a shahakol. So just hayoyse mitzvarenu, what have we said today? Rice, if eaten raw, you make a ber priadoma. But ordinarily, any form of processed or cooked, you make a ber mitzvah. You always make a ber nefashis after rice. Soya, you make a shahakol. Popcorn, you make a ber priadoma. And cakes and things made out of potato flour, you make a shahakol. But the evid, if you made a ber priadoma, then you are yotzei. See that?